right, welcome guys back to the Comics and Cinema Club. I'm Drew,
And I'm Matt.
and welcome back to the Comics Corner today. Today we're going to be starting something where we just talk about characters in comics in general, and talk about specific comics and characters that we really like and love. And today we should start with one of our favorite comic book characters, Spider-Man. Now, before we get into it, we want to make something clear. We are not going to be talking about the Zeb Wells run, because we mentioned that when we talked about the Ultimate Comics, and also because we really don't want to talk about the negatives of Spider-Man, because that would take at least 3 hours. And
And we really do not want to give this the attention it so desperately craves because, as I said before, this run is the equivalent of being lost in a forest and having the tour guide take you around in circles. And when you point out the same trees and rocks and whatever, the tour guide pretends that we haven't seen them before like 3 times already. So, because this run just loves to run around in circles. So we don't want to waste time just bashing that because we could bash it till we're blue in the face, but it won't change anything. So instead, we want to talk about the runs that really impacted us and ones that we really recommend instead of reading the Wells run, just to keep
yeah,
you guys in some good Spidey or Spidey-like content, you know?
yeah, we're going to be talking a lot about Spider-Man in general and how he affects us, where we think he's really good, both in comics and outside of comics, some of our favorite characters and villains, arcs, runs, whole sort of stuff. And at the end, we're also going to have some comic recommendations that deal with Spider-Man in general, indirectly Spider-Man, or just favorite runs that we think everyone should read. So I guess getting into it right off the bat is the best way to do it is with a question. And I guess, Matt, how did you first get into Spider-Man?
Uh, well, Spider-Man, for some reason, and I think this is universal. Spider-Man is one of those things you're just born knowing, you know? Like it's like something where you're never really familiar with like your very first story or just where and how you learned about it. It's just something you always know. You know, it's like the big twist in Empire Strikes Back or uh uh what's something else that it's like universally known.
Uh,
Birds fly, fish swim, and all that
yeah,
sort of stuff.
2 + 2 = 4.
Yes, it's just
The
something that
sky is
you
blue.
always knew is and you're just always familiar with. So I think one of the very first things I had with Spider-Man specifically, because growing up I wasn't big into too as big into superheroes as I am now. I was more into Transformers and all that stuff and Godzilla and dinosaurs. And I think like my very first experience with him was Spider-Man 2. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 2. Just remember, because I just remember being 6 years old and having those tentacles slowly raise up. That's one of my core memories because I had never seen something like that before. That's just cool. So there's that. And I remember Spider-Man 3 like perfectly. I just remembered watching that. And it was just so much fun as a kid, but so kind of cringe. Keep in mind, my favorite heroes growing up were the Fantastic Four, and we'll get into those eventually.
We'll have to
That
talk
we'll
about them
do a
for
whole
sure.
Yeah, we'll do a whole episode on them because those are my favorite superheroes, and they still are. I got more into Spider-Man growing up uh, during high school and college when the Holland films came around because I love Spider-Man. I watched the Andrew films in theaters with my dad, and I'll always have good connections with them. But I never really related to Spider-Man the way I did members of the Fantastic Four or other things. But when Tom's films came along, man, by God, I related to him. All of the struggles that he was going through were the ones I was going through growing up. The struggle to be taken seriously by my adult peers, the uh, desire to feel like you're beyond your current station in life, and all that stuff. And then realizing you're not, and then realizing that you have to take your time and grow up naturally. But when you do reach those points, you'll have to learn how prepared you really are for them, which is what he went through in Homecoming and Far From Home, and the struggles for sacrifice and all that he made in No Way Home. That to me is like if I was wearing the mask, you know. Like I know the whole thing was with Spider-Man is anyone can wear the mask, like especially in Into the Spider-Verse. That's like my favorite thing. Uh, that is like, but with Tom specifically, that's like if I was wearing the mask specifically, me. That's me up there. And I know Tom Spidey isn't for everybody. I think maybe there's just a bit of a generational gap, but for me, Tom is my Spider-Man. And that's when I really started getting into his comics and his lore and his history and how terrible One More Day is. So, uh,
Yeah.
that's about it. But like the biggest book when I was growing up was definitely the original Ultimate Spider-Man. That was one that was like everywhere because of how big it was, you know?
Which was pretty good, honestly. Yeah, that's a really good answer, actually.
How
For
about you though,
me,
Drew?
yeah,
Pass that
sorry.
back to you.
Uh, for me, I got into Spider-Man in a couple different ways. One of the biggest ways was the Tobey Maguire films. I'm a big Tobey fan. I really like Spider-Man 2, and I like the original Spider-Man. Spider-Man 3, I'm mixed on. I think Sandman is by far one of the best characters in that movie, and he's perfect. And I just liked everything about those movies. And I kind of relate a little more to Tobey because he does a great Peter Parker. He's downtrodden, he's down on his luck, he's always trying to overcome things, but he keeps getting beat down. To me, though, my first real memory of Spider-Man was in the comics. And it was because when I was a kid, I had a big collection of Spider-Man comics. I think I got it for a birthday or Christmas, or it just appeared one day in my bedroom. I honestly don't know how I got it sometimes, but it was a collection of just Spider-Man stories, and it started off with arguably one of his most iconic arcs, If This Be My Destiny. And I just remember
Hmm.
reading that whole arc, him trying to get a cure for Aunt May's disease, fighting the Master Planner, Doc Ock, all of his minions, lifting the heavy machinery, showing the indomitable human spirit, and it just stuck with me. And it just, to me, that was like, that was a superhero. That was who Spider-Man was, but he also had the other side of him. He was relatable. He was a teenage, college-age kid going through life and struggling, and that's what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man. When you cut away everything else, he's just like us. He's just another guy. Yeah, he has powers. Yeah, he has abilities, but he's just a person. He's just going through the same stuff we are, and that's what makes him so good. And in general, his comics as well. So
Yeah, as a character, Spidey is meant to represent the indomitable human spirit. Uh, it's up to the writers to really emphasize that aspect of him. And recently, they haven't been doing that. But usually, when he's done right, uh, that sort of thing is something that has always come through the indomitable human will. Because I recently just saw Spider-Man 2 in theaters, and that whole thing was all about challenging his indomitable will and just like breaking him down. It's not the perfect version of Spider-Man No More. We'll get into that in a second, but it is something that is really a Spider-Man like challenge. That's just having your will broken down and having life after life pile on top of you. Your best friend hates you. Your other best friend who you love is getting married to someone else, even though you two both love each other, but you can't be together because you want to keep her safe. And it's like that whole thing really piled on, and you really see that there. Your
mm,
new mentor just went insane and became a supervillain that you probably have to take down. So seeing that will break and then rising above that sort of thing, that's what makes Spider-Man 2 so special to me.
yeah,
And unlike Fantastic Four 2, Rise of the Silver Surfer, it feels earned. I'm
yeah.
sorry, we'll talk about the Fantastic Four eventually,
That's
but
another
nonetheless.
time. But I definitely get what you're saying there. The other thing too, I'll say, is just that, everything you said about Spider-Man is right, Matt. Is that like he keeps getting the world piled onto him, and I think that that's what, without getting too deep into it, what a lot of writers get wrong is that they think we have to keep beating him over the head and smacking him down for people to find him relatable. When there are plenty of comics out there that don't, that show him go through these struggles, but he learns from them and he matures because of it instead of just getting constantly beaten down. And that is what makes him who he is. Not the fact that he's depressy spaghetti all the time, but the fact that he will get beat down and always get back up.
Hmm. Like you don't need to add more and more conflict in order to make your conflict good. You
Yeah.
just need to have your ideal conflict to just be like one, just like your simple conflict, and have it be like relatable. You don't need to keep piling so many things onto them to the point where it just becomes unbearable for the reader, but just enough for it to be hard for Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And granted, this has come and gone with varying degrees of success. In the 90s, he was so super edgy and like depressing and all that. He was literally just like Ben Riley in Spider-Verse, just crouching and just monologuing. I'm so tortured. I'm so mentally depressed. And then later on in 2000s, he was fine up until One More Day.
Yeah. Well, it was also like, yeah, he definitely can be there. He had his edgy moments when he had the black suit. And that's sort of like what everybody signifies as like, oh, Spider-Man's getting edgy when he's got the black suit on and everything. But he's got his wholesome moments. And I mean, there are plenty of comic moments that emphasize that. And I think that like Matt has a run that he really likes, and I
Hmm.
have a run I really like that have just really wholesome Spider-Man moments. And the one from the run I like is by Chip Zdarsky and called Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man. It's towards the end of his run. It's the last issue actually, where people are just talking about Spider-Man and why they like him so much. And it tells this great story about this kid who gets involved in crime with these two men and because they knew his dad or something. And the mom is telling the story about how he got in with this rough crowd. He helps as a lookout. He's running away. Spider-Man finds him and he helps him get away because he's just a kid. And then later on, it shows that like he even goes into the kid's like house and he helps him with his homework and like helps him with his math. And it's like that's who Spider-Man is. He cares. He likes people. There was other wholesome moments in that last issue too of like this other kid who basically, he gets garbage dumped on him during a fight that Peter was having with Dr. Octopus and Peter feeling bad gives him new clothes that he can wear to his date. And the other side of it though is the kid in the first story with the mom, he ends up being killed by these guys, by these two men. And it just shows Spider-Man going after these guys and then being on a rooftop afterwards and crying because he tries so hard and he's not always going to win. He's not always going to succeed, but he's always going to try. And whoever he can help, that's what he takes as a victory.
Yes, and the one that I really enjoy, one issue that I really know was the last issue of. We'll get into more about why we really recommend these runs and what makes them so special later. But just speaking on one issue, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man by Tom Taylor. During the last issue, Aunt May is in a major surgery, given her chemotherapy since she's suffering from cancer in this line, which is not something that's mentioned anywhere else. So this is meant to be a companion piece with like the Amazing Spider-Man that was going on, but nothing in this is mentioned there. I genuinely think this is its own thing, but we'll get more into that later. During this issue, May's having important surgery and the power goes out. It goes out all across New York. This is a big cyber attack. Spider-Man doesn't want to leave, but he knows he has to in order to go stop this. Uh, the big thing that really gets to me though is when Spidey's trying to stop crime from destroying New York, given the opportunity it has. Um, During this, Peter's actions were interrupted by other superheroes like Miles, the Human Torch, the new character Rumor, who we'll go into in a second. Um, all of these characters, all of Spider-Man's friends, all of the Fantastic Four, Miss Marvel, the Avengers, the Defenders, they literally step in and just tell Spider-Man, "Hey, go be where you need to be. Your neighborhood's covered." And it's just seeing all of these bigger than life superheroes coming together to help their friend. That's the sort of thing that Spider-Man inspires. Not consistently beating him down, reminding him what a terrible friend he is, or just having one big misunderstanding that apparently cuts off their entire relationship, but just literally inspiring the hearts and minds of so many heroes to be their best selves and protect the innocent, specifically because he leads by example. That to me is something that really speaks about Spider-Man, not just as like a hero, but as a public figure. So that's something that's really impactful from one. That's one of my favorite Spider-Man stories, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, the question should be what can Peter do, not what did Peter do. Um,
Yes.
but
And the answer for that was nothing. He did absolutely nothing wrong. It's what everybody
yeah,
around him did. Do you fucking know how to write? Sorry, sorry.
now, for those confused, there was this whole thing built up into Zebul's run where like Peter and MJ split. Everybody hated him because he did something and he literally didn't do anything. And they built it up for like 25 freaking issues. Like, what'd he
And I knew,
do? What'd he do?
I fuck,
And he didn't do anything. So,
I fucking knew it was going to be nothing because if it was something that deserved all this backlash, it would have been too much for the audience to accept. So fuck
yeah,
this run again. We're not
yeah.
talking about that.
No, and it did a crappy job with like the side characters in that too, like with Mary Jane, with Robbie Robinson and Jay Jonah. And that's the other thing is that when Spider-Man is done right, the characters around him are just as good because you can have
Mm-hmm.
all like Spider-Man has spawned so many fantastic side characters over the years. I mean, you have freaking J. Jonah Jameson who has become so iconic and so memorable. You have Mary Jane, who everybody we'll always love. Gwen Stacy, who's always going to be sort of the tragic character. Harry Osborn, Norman Osborn, the list goes on and on and on. There's just so many great side characters that come in there to support Spider-Man, and that's what also makes it so good.
And it was the whole thing about my issue wasn't that it was Spider-Man's friends coming in, specifically Spider-Man's friends like Mary Jane and Harry and all that. It was other superheroes. It's like that he leaves such a big impact on the superhero community. That's something that I really enjoy. But nonetheless, yeah, with so many, it's amazing how so many years later, all of his side characters from Kurt Connors to Otto Octavius are still so freaking memorable and likable and relatable to the point when they show up in new things, people get really, really excited for them. Like I remember when the first trailer for Spider-Man 2 dropped, and everybody was so freaking excited to see the Lizard, and he's this big kaiju-like style design, and I thought, man, this is so much love for the Lizard. I didn't think I would see this much for the Lizard, you know? And like again, it's like when people take these characters in new directions, like how the MCU took MJ and Ned, and how Ultimate Spider-Man is currently treating them. Like when these characters are done right, it reminds us all just why they have endured for so long, because they're just so much likable characters. But when they're not done right, you get the current amazing, and it's just terrible.
Yeah, and
literally fucking that issue where MJ's kids died. All I could think it was world's smallest violin. Yeah, boo hoo.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't have a Spider-Man conversation without talking about it a little bit. But
yes,
I'm sorry.
Again,
it's the side characters. Again, it leads into the side characters. When the side characters are done well, they are just as good as the main, and that's where like Spider-Man comics can be really good, because you can have an entire and the Chip Zdarsky run that I mentioned. Like you have this whole issue where Spider-Man has a dinner with J. Jonah Jameson, and J. Jonah is there. It's literally just re-talking about and re-tracking through their life and their relationship and everything that they've gone through. And it ends literally with Jonah basically breaking down because he feels like he's always losing and he's hurting. And Peter reveals his identity to him. And it just makes for such a great moment, because it's great development for Jonah, because then he decides, I'm not going to reveal Spider-Man's identity. I'm not going to tell the world, because this is Peter Parker. This is a guy who I know. And I'd also like to build onto that with Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi one, where you have that whole scene where the Green Goblin busts into the office. He grabs J. Jonah Jameson and he goes, who was a photographer? Who gives you the pictures? That's Spider-Man. And he just goes, I don't know who he is. His stuff comes in the mail, when he knows full well who he is, because that's a great character. That's a three-dimensional, perfectly layered character that works really well.
Some people size Pete Jameson risks so much for this guy he barely knew, but that's a testament to Jameson himself, because he's not someone who's going to turn over a kid, whether he likes him or not, to a murderous psychopath. That's a testament to Jameson as a character, and that's the reason why Raimi's version will always be the best.
Yeah, it will be one of the best for sure. It always has a special place in my heart, along with Spectacular Spider-Man, which is another great series. That's an animated show.
Yes.
It is also very well done.
Yes, a very fantastic one in my opinion, because it earns the title of being spectacular. That Jameson is voiced by Darren Norris, who you might recognize as Cosmo from Fairly Odd Parents or Knockout from Transformers Prime. His voice is very much impersonating JK, but it's still very much distinctive. Although it always throws me off that they went with the exclamation point style mustache, because that always looks like Hitler to me. But yeah, that's neither here nor there.
It's really weird that they did go with that mustache for the comics. I know that was like a popular style at the time, because Charlie Chaplin also had it, but it's still very weird.
It wasn't even that popular. It was literally, this book came out in the 60s. That was decades after Hitler was killed. So it wasn't exactly like after all that, it wasn't that popular anymore.
I don't even know about, popular wasn't the right word, but I know it was like something that people would wear, but I just was like, I keep looking back at them, I'm like, why? And it's weird because most people don't try and give him like a goatee or a beard or anything. They're like, nah, we're gonna keep it. It's like, okay, but he's still a good character.
Okay,
and so
yes, he is.
So are a lot of the other guys, like Harry Osborn and Mary Jane, who we talked about already. But then also, I think that a lot of people miss the point about Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy, because Mary Jane isn't just the girl Peter fell for. She's flawed, but she's good because she's flawed. She has great character development and aspects of her, whereas Gwen Stacy was the perfect girl. And that's a hard memory to, I don't know. I mean, I'm not wrong in that sense that like she
No, 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 no.
was always viewed as being like the pure one. And not trying to be like that, but like,
Mhm.
Mary Jane was
Yeah.
always depicted as being sort of the wild one. She was a party girl. She did all this stuff. Gwen Stacy was always the perfect person. And that was why she sort of got taken away, is because, they had to make Peter feel that pain. And she's still a good character. Gwen Stacy has also gotten good development, and the Spider Gwen series and all that, when they finally decided to not just leave her in the past and update her. But it's cool to see the sort of development that you get with the sort of the love interests, when they're not just being love interests, like with Mary Jane or Black Cat or Betty Brant or all those sort of guys.
Yeah, and the reason I was groaning earlier is because people wanted to try to make her seem less perfect by giving her the Sins Past story, but we don't talk about that anymore. That got retconned out of existence.
I
Thank
actually
you, Nick
do get
Spencer.
it. Yeah, for those who don't know what Since Past is, it basically was a story that said Gwen Stacy had sex with Norman Osborn and had children. But
Willing consensual sex, by the way, not just our
uh,
word.
Nick Spencer, though, he wrote the last iteration of Amazing Spider-Man, came in though and was like, nah, it was just clones.
Yeah.
He literally just came in and said, and that's another thing with Spider-Man. We were talking about this before we got started. Spider-Man always has clones, which is
Hmm.
really weird. And there's literally been like 3 different clone sagas that have come out of it.
Five at least.
Wait, what was the fifth one?
The ultimate version.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That was also a
Yeah,
weird one.
Ultimate Spider-Man got his own, but honestly, it wasn't as bad as this. It had some interesting moments. It wasn't as confusing as
Yeah,
the normal one is.
yeah. Clone Saga. Out of all the Spider-Man arcs, it's probably one of the most confusing ones, because it was just like, hey, let's introduce all these different clones of Spider-Man and maybe say he's not the real Spider-Man, while also having Ben Riley, who's a very interesting character that I honestly think deserves a little more love than some people give him. So
Yeah, I don't I have never really cared about Ben, but I will say when he is enjoyable, he is enjoyable, but for some reason nobody really knows what to do with him anymore. So
I
they just
feel,
keep kind of turning him into a villain, and I don't really like that.
yeah, he's been a villain
Especially
since.
when the reason for him being a villain makes no sense. Your mind is scrambled. Okay, talk to the telepath that you're on speaking terms with, Madeline
Yeah,
Pryor, and have her fix your mind. Or
yeah,
fucking call Jean or Emma Frost or Charles Xavier
yeah.
or Doctor Strange. Any of the millions of telepaths you know. Not a fan of
Is
casting.
Doctor Strange
Anyway,
really a telepath?
he can fix his mind. He uses magic. He can fix his mind, probably.
No, Doctor Strange can't fix things like that. He couldn't cure an old lady of a gunshot wound, so why could he do that?
Yes, why
We're
could
not
he do
getting
that?
into it.
Yes.
Sorry. But no.
They literally
You're
show
not.
him.
You're
They used him.
you're not. You're not wrong though about Ben Riley, because Ben Riley, he was the clone of Spider-Man. It was a whole thing where basically they were like, "Hey, this guy is Spider-Man's clone. Oh no, maybe he's the real Spider-Man." And then he died for like 30. He faded to dust for like 30 years, and then he came back for a recent comic called Clone Conspiracy. But after that, nobody really knew what to do with him. He just was sort of there. And then Zeb Wells took him and, took away his core memories or something, and he just became a really stereotypical bad guy who didn't really have anything to add. And honestly, just having him be the clone of Spider-Man to me is the perfect thing you can do. You don't need to add anything else to it. His whole existence, reason for existing, is because he's a facsimile of one of the world's greatest superheroes. What kind of pressure would that put on a guy like that? Like, you could build a whole thing off of that. And I love the concept of like trying to live up to the legacy of freaking Spider-Man while also doing your own thing, which could also be put onto Miles. But Miles did take on the legacy of Spider-Man. And Miles is another. We haven't even talked about Miles yet. Miles is another great character who like got some great development and everything.
Oh, frick.
Is there an earthquake?
I'm sorry. Yeah, there was an earthquake. Am I
Oh
recording? I'm
dang.
sorry.
No,
I was
it's okay. I
adjacent
saw
to
the
it.
whole roof shake. I was like, dang.
Okay. Sorry about that. I live in
No, good.
California. This happens a lot. Anyway, the the thing with Miles Morales, a lot of people didn't like him at first because they said a lot of his stories were basically repeats of Peter's original stories. But that help it works for Miles because he's such a young character and because he he was able to go through all these things. He became a better Spider-Man. The only problem I really had was a lot of his stories were written by a white person, so a lot of it came across with un, unnatural ebonics. So it just like, come on.
Yeah,
But
that's changed though
that's
recently.
neither yeah, that's neither here nor there. Cody Ziegler is the current writer for him, and he does an amazing job. That isn't like the current Miles Morales run. That's fantastic. And also, Into the Spider Verse brought him into more of a public view because I'm sure people knew about him, but they didn't like know him the way they do Peter Parker. But that said, he is definitely in the public light now, and people adore him, and I am all for it. Miles is amazing, honest to God.
Yeah, when the one character, one of the few characters you bring over from the Ultimate Universe is Miles Morales, you know that you're doing something right. The other thing about Miles, well, two things, is that a lot of his popularity was because of Into the Spider-Verse, which is a fantastic movie. I honestly really like it, and it just, it understood his character really well, and it developed him really well too. Being like anyone can wear the mask. This is who you are. This is what Miles is. And the other thing too is I don't think a lot of people know this. Miles Morales exists because of Donald Glover. I hope people
Yes.
know that like during so Brian Michael Bendis wanted to do a different take on Spider-Man, and Donald Glover in an episode of Community I think was wearing like Spider-Man pajamas or something, and was pretending to be Spider-Man. So Brian Michael Bendis latched onto that and based Miles off of Donald Glover, and because of
It
that
wasn't
we
even
got yeah.
it
Go
wasn't
ahead.
even just because of that. It was like it was the fans' response to Donald
Yeah.
Glover because people were saying, "Hey, Donald Glover should be Spider-Man," but by that point there was only Peter Parker and he was only white, and so people were arguing about it. And then eventually it went back and forth until Miles came along. And fun fact, Donald Glover was actually the first voice actor for Miles Morales during the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon series,
I
which
did
was
not know
a
that
while back.
actually. I don't know if he
Yeah,
did
fun
that.
fact.
Huh. It's cool.
Yeah, it was his very first voice actor, and years later he would go on to be the Prowler, who is Miles's uncle, uh, in the MCU at least, and recently cameo in Across the Spider Verse. So I can't wait to see if they bring him back because I love Donald Glover and I loved
Yeah.
his Prowler. So I really hope they bring him back.
Yeah, it was just a cool little tidbit. And Miles in general, like he has his own villains, he has his own rogues gallery, he has his own problems, but he's just as much a Spider-Man as Peter Parker is. And that goes for all the
Hmm.
other like whole Spider-Verse of Spider-Man out there, like Noir and Miguel O'Hara, who's also a really interesting character beyond the Spider-Man movies. Like he actually is like he's not just a guy who's intended on like protecting the multiverse. I hope people know that. He is an
Yeah,
actually like good, interesting character. Silk, who's also she's just kind of interesting.
Silk is the name of Cindy Moon, a Korean American student who was bitten by the same radioactive spider that gave Peter Parker his powers. The idea behind them originally was whenever she and Peter Parker were so close together, their hormones and pheromones would cause them to uncontrollably bone. And of course, that's didn't age well, but nonetheless, Silk has endured as a character and has moved beyond that. These two are able to be around each other now, but she's had a really interesting miniseries. The whole thing was like she was in dreams fighting some character,
yeah,
and she had a different genre for dreams. One dream she was a pirate, another she was a cowboy or cowgirl. It was a whole interesting thing. I really recommend that little miniseries. But to put it bluntly, Silk didn't start off great, but she eventually got a whole lot better.
yeah. Same like Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099 also has gotten a couple of miniseries recently that have just been kind of fun. They've just been running around and doing a whole bunch of crazy stuff with him, but he also is an interesting character. He's more just the Spider-Man of the future. He's not like I gotta protect the multiverse. I can't allow this to happen. He's more along the lines just like I gotta run around and do stuff. He is part vampire though. That is kind of a weird
Yes.
tidbit. But then you got Spider Woman, Jessica Drew, who's also a good character and interesting, and she's got her own powers and stuff. And Gwen Stacy, the Spider Woman of Earth 65, I believe.
Five.
Yeah.
65. Yep.
And then you got Spider Man Noir, who everybody loves because Nicolas Cage. did a fantastic job with him.
Spider Ham, the cartoon Spidey, and of course my personal favorite, Spider Rex,
Yeah.
who is literally just a T-Rex. Spider-Man as a T-Rex is literally, it shouldn't work, but for some reason it does. But anyway, other variants are of course Pavritir Prabhakar, who is Prabhakar, Pravitir Prabhakar. His name is a bit hard to say, but he's a Indian Spider-Man. I really enjoy. What are some other famous ones? There's of course Renew Your Vows Spider-Man, and
which everybody
his whole family.
likes. Yeah,
and of course the current Ultimate, who is amazing and is like my favorite one by far, but just 4 issues.
Yeah. There's also a lot of other Spider Women, and then there's a whole bunch of like different clones. There's Kane Parker, who's another sort of clone of Spider-Man, but he's less sort of weird than Ben. He's still weird. I don't really get him, but he's not as weird as Ben. And then you also got like, go ahead.
Mayday Parker, who is from the not the one from Renew Your Vows, though that one is still pretty good, but there's another one from Earth 928, I believe, who is that was a what if Spider-Man and Mary Jane's daughter didn't die in childbirth. So that was an interesting story because that happened to them in the real line, and it was really depressing. But Mayday Parker, also someone who's really, really cool. There are so many Spider people out there that it would honestly take its own video to go into all of that.
And then you also have other Spider characters like Madam Web. Look, Madam Web in the I don't know why they went out and did all that stuff with the movie. We're gonna watch the movie at some point soon, but it just is like if you look up Madam Web, she literally is just an old woman who's in a wheelchair. I don't know why they were like, we have to give her own origin. Her origin is she can see the future. That's it. She's old. She's blind. She can see the future. I don't know why they thought we needed to build something off of that.
Literally, there are only 2 versions of this character that people would possibly know about, and there is the one from the '90s show who was kind of frustrating at times because of how vague her riddles were. And then, you know who the real one is? Freaking Rachel Dratch's character from Across the Spider-Verse. That little therapist, that school counselor at the beginning of the film that Miles's parents meet with. That's Cassandra Webb. That is fucking Madam Web, and it's Rachel Dratch. It's literally just Rachel Dratch, and I fucking love her. I like Rachel Dratch, so glad to see she's still getting work.
Yeah, it's just weird that they were like, she needs her own movie, but is what it is, I guess. And then, of course, you have other characters that exist in the Spider-Man universe who can be heroes, can be villains, particularly one of his most famous anti-heroes, Venom. And
we are Venom.
Yeah. Venom in general is a really interesting character. And I like Venom a lot when he's written well. And my whole thing is that I have beef with the Venom movie because the Venom movie was basically like, hey, we're going to have the Venom symbiote give Eddie cancer. Oh, they got to go save the world now. Okay, they're friends now. Fuck it. Let's go save the world. It's like, that's not fucking Venom. I mean, it can be. Look, here's the thing. Venom can be goofy as hell. He has a lot of moments in the comics where he is goofy. But people forget he was literally a villain for like years before he ended up becoming an anti-hero. And then he became an anti-hero, and he still wasn't really like a hero. He was biting people's heads off and still not doing great things. It's only until recently that he actually became like heroic in a sense. And he ended up like, you know, becoming a space god or something. That's also a really confusing comic. But he's really interesting, is all I'm saying, is that when he's written well, Venom can be great.
I freaking love Venom. Venom was like, in Spider-Man 3, he was like one of my first major Spider-Man villains that I've ever seen on top of Dr. Octopus. The fact that he was so ubiquitous too, like everybody freaking latched onto him. He was created in 1989. He came out in the same year as Little Mermaid. So it's like he's only that old compared to Spider-Man's other villains, but he has still endured and become one of his all-time best. Like think of all of his new villains, like I don't know, Kindred or the whatever the guy's name is in the current run. Do you really think that they're going to stick around for too long? Because I honestly don't. Because a lot of how they are handled, I don't know, the freaking God thing, whatever.
I have no idea what his name was. Sorry, keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just was like, Paul? That's what I was. I thought you were talking about Paul, and I was like, what?
Paul's dad. I forgot.
Right, I forgot who was his dad. Keep going. Sorry.
All of those guys, do you really think that they're going to stick around for as long as Venom? Because I sure as hell don't. But Venom quickly became one of Spidey's arch rivals because he was one of his most persistent and intense villains, and to see that and that sort of monster grow and turn into more of a human three-dimensional character, that's something that's incredibly compelling. That's something that's really sticks with you. It's a reason why he's so popular now. He's not just evil Spider-Man. We can get evil Spider-Man if we want, but he's not just that. He's very much Peter's most persistent rival in the best way. And it was compelling to see them team up, especially in Maximum Carnage, one of my favorite Spider-Man stories, because he's literally just we literally have these two different polar perspectives on how to do the right thing, whether it be extreme anti-heroistic style punishment or Spider-Man style good guy, stop the bad guys with a few nice words or punches thing. Just basically not killing. But you have that sort of dichotomy, and it worked so well in that book. So I really recommend people read that. And it's like 18 issues long, so it will really, really stick with you.
Yeah, it was like one of the massive arcs that they did like during Spider-Man's run. He had like all these huge like arcs that would come out of it that would cross over with multiple comics and everything that were not like, what they do nowadays, which is like 5-issue miniseries and tie-in comics, but like actually like huge arcs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The other sort of like Venom being like this really one-dimensional character going to three-dimensional, Flash Thompson, who ended up becoming a version of Venom called Agent Venom, who basically Flash Thompson was a bully of Peter Parker for ages. If you watch the Raimi films, he's the guy who goes, "I wouldn't want to fight me neither." And he actually ended up that actor became Joe DiMaggio, I think. He ended up becoming Slade in the Snyderverse and all that stuff. But
Yep.
basically,
Joe
Flash Thompson.
DiMaggio? No.
No, it was. Look it up. Look it up. I'm not kidding. I'm pretty
Do you
sure
think his name is not Joe DiMaggio? Joe DiMaggio is a baseball player.
I know. Look it up. I'm not kidding you. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not kidding you. I swear to God, it's Joe DiMaggio.
No, it's Joe Manganiello.
God damn it. Well,
that's Joe DiMaggio.
I can't
That's
speak.
the other guy.
I don't know. Yeah, I know. I thought there was a DI in front of it. That's my bad. I know who Joe DiMaggio is. I know he's a famous baseball player from like the 30s or 40s or whatever. But I swear to God, I thought his
There's
name
so
was...
many baseball fans who are going to be so pissed off at us.
Well,
this
how many baseball fans do you think? How many people do you think listen?
Enough for them to still make Topps chewing gum baseball cards. So let's just say that.
That's fair. Anyway, Joe Maggio played Flash Thompson. Flash Thompson in the Flash Thompson. I don't care. I can't talk. All right. Flash Thompson in the comics basically goes to fight in war, and he gets his legs blown off. And when he comes home, he gets an opportunity to serve in another way. He gets brought into Project Rebirth, which was the same project that created Captain America, and he gets bonded with the Venom symbiote to go off and do missions for the U.S. government. Are you still on? Are you still on Joe? No. Get off of Joe.
No. It's like you called it Vinny. I just want to think of like Vinny as like a Vic name for Venom. Hey, how's it going, Vinny?
We'll swallow your soul.
I didn't need to call him Vinny, but now I'm just thinking of my cousin Vinny. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, but he went off on like these covert missions. He fought Crime Master. He did all this really cool stuff, and it was a really that's another comic I put out there too that is pretty good, like Maximum Carnage. Another anti-hero sort of character that I don't think a lot of people know came from Spider-Man comics, Punisher. Mm-hmm. Punisher his first appearance was in, I think it was a Marvel team-up comic or something like that.
It wasn't. It was literally just in a normal Amazing Spider-Man issue.
I wasn't sure. I thought he like showed up in like a team-up or something, but it was like his first appearance was in a Spider-Man comic where he came in and he was brought in by the Jackal to go after Spider-Man. He was tricked into thinking Spidey was a villain. So he was targeting him and trying to take him out. And then he became a really successful character that he spun off into his own thing, quite like Venom. So that's really interesting to see that Spider-Man can handle anti-heroes like that so well. But another thing Spider-Man handles really well too are the villains. And the villains, Rogues Gallery of Spider-Man will probably go down in history as one of the best Rogues Gallery in comic book history because of all the different characters and villains he has and he faces and the dimensions that they add to everything. Because he's got the classic ones. He's got Green Goblin, Doc Ock, the Sinister Six, Sandman, who was, like I said before, fantastic, and Spider-Man 3 added a lot of depth to him. Scorpion, Hydro Man, Mysterio, Molten Man. List goes on and on. Vulture, Shocker. Get back here, Shocker.
Shocker.
List goes on
Rhino,
and on.
Lizard,
Lizard. And don't forget his most infamous villain of all, Big Wheel.
Yes, Big Wheel. I love Big Wheel. When are we gonna get him in a Spider-Verse movie, guys? Come on.
Where's Big Wheel solo film? You know, why can't we have that? Like, we're getting Venom and Kraven the Hunter. Why can't we have Big Wheel the movie? Or why can't they
fucking Hypno Hustler? We can have Hypno Hustler, and for a while we could have had freaking El Muerto. He was in 2 comics.
Oh my God.
2.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Now it's not happening anymore, but nonetheless, it's like, why are you gonna do all that and not give it to the fun villains that we want, like Big Wheel? Come on, guys.
That's the funny thing about Spider-Man villains is that you have all the iconic villains, and then you have guys like literally a person who can hypnotize you with disco, or like a guy whose power is I bang big wheels and I roll around. And then you got like Superior Foes of Spider-Man, which is one of my favorite Spider-Man comics, which is like these 5 low-level supervillains making their own version of the Sinister Six. And yeah, I said 5, going around and trying to like top the Superior Spider. Oh, that was another we didn't even mention, Superior Spider-Man. But that's a whole other topic. Doc Ock putting his brain into Peter Parker's body, trying to be a better Spider-Man. But Superior Foes is great, and Spider-Man villains in general are also great. But yeah.
And not to mention, what also works is that the villains work really well outside of Spider-Man, because whenever they cross over with other heroes, they can be really interesting. My all-time favorite Spider-Man villain and my all-time favorite villain in comic books is the Kingpin. Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, is literally my favorite supervillain because he's not a supervillain. He's a crime lord. He's a big boss, and yet he's still able to hold so much sway in a world with superhumans without powers, just kind of being big and strong like a sumo wrestler. He's literally so intimidating and such a good foe for Spidey because these two represent different sides of a moral dichotomy. Like literally just having Kingpin represent kind of the purest evil imaginable, but also a side of humanity to him, and Peter, who is all just pure good. But nonetheless, Kingpin works amazingly as a Daredevil villain as well. So there's that. Like I will always say, he's a Spidey villain. He's Daredevil's arch enemy first, but he will always be a Spider-Man villain, which is why it makes me very happy that he seems to be the main villain of Ultimate Spider-Man. But other options I think of, I'm sorry, I know you got something to say, but other options I think of, in the 90s, there was a time when there was like a whole arc where Venom was helping a bunch of villains escape from the vault, and the Avengers and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants had to team up to stop him. So that was really interesting. And not to mention, Shocker once crossed over with Ms. Marvel and was like trying to build himself up as a Kingpin in Jersey and tried to become her arch nemesis. And she's like, no thanks, I got my own problems to deal with. And that was a really good book too.
Yeah, he's also freaking Shocker. So
yes.
I also just remember like Rhino ended up like running into Miles a bunch of times, and he ended up actually they fleshed out his character in one run where they were like, he's actually not that bad of a guy. He's just a big guy in a suit that looks like a rhino, which was interesting.
Again, all these characters, again, it's literally like they work so well for Spider-Man, but they also work well as general villains. Like originally, I think the Rhino was supposed to fight like the Hulk. Yeah, that's what he was created for, to be like a rival for the Hulk. But Spider-Man got in his way first. And by created, I don't mean like by Stan Lee or Steve Ditko. I mean by like the communist government that created him back in the day. Like literally, yeah, he was a communist. He was a Russian.
No. I know it took me a second. I thought you were like, you know.
No, he was a Soviet.
I just imagine before Stalin dies, Stalin's like on his deathbed, and I know Stalin died in the 50s. Ignore this, but like Stalin just is like, before I die, make sure they make Russian man Big Rhino in Marvel comic. Sir, what is Marvel comic?
Yes.
Don't worry about it. Just make it happen. Or just the way you said that made me. But yeah, no, he's a Russian and he's primarily a communist in the comics, and he also has some good development arcs too in that way. Um, I was just gonna say that yeah, I mean, Spider-Man's also got he's got some sort of animal theme going because he's got a lot of animal-based villains. He's got Doc Ock and Vulture
just ask
and
just ask Craven that. He'll do something about it.
which is where I was going to lead this into my favorite Spider-Man character, Kraven the Hunter. And part of why that is if I mentioned If This Be My Destiny at the very start of this. In the collection of If This Be My Destiny gets to the end, Peter Parker has won the day, but he's, downtrodden and everything. And the next issue, the teaser for the next issue is Kraven the Hunter, a big burly Russian, who's also a Russian guy actually, tearing apart the page and coming at you, and it just says Kraven the Hunter returns. And I turn the page, and it's this whole story about this crazy hunter who believes that he has to hunt the ultimate prey in the form of Spider-Man to best him, going after him, hunting him down, and pretending to be him, challenging him. And it was really interesting to see how they played him. And this is how good Spider-Man villains and villains in general can be when they're written well. Because Kraven, he was kind of a goofy guy. He was literally just some crazy Russian billionaire who was like, I must hunt Spider-Man. And he ran out and he tried to get Spider-Man with all these elaborate traps and potions and stuff. But then you get into one of my favorite Spider-Man comics of all time, Kraven's Last Hunt, which basically was Kraven loses his mind. He goes after Spider-Man. He captures Spider-Man, and he supposedly kills him. And then from there, the comic takes off. That's literally the first issue. The first issue is Spider-Man gets shot in the head by Kraven. And it's later revealed that he's not actually dead. He's in a coma or something. He got tranked. But as the comic progresses, it develops Kraven. It shows his insanity. It shows him trying to become the Spider when he's meant to be the Hunter. It shows him going up against another Spider-Man villain, Vermin. It shows Mary Jane's perspective, trying to figure out where Peter is, dealing with the stress and the trauma of he might not be alive anymore. Kraven dealing with his own insanity and talking a lot about his own family who also dealt with insanity. All of it leading to this big ending where Kraven, unfortunately, takes his own life. And it ends it's just a brutal, intense, and great comic that made such a goofy character into something so impactful. And I think I can also say the same thing about Kingpin, because Kingpin, I mean, when you look at him, he's just a big guy. He looks like a bowling ball. But I kind of thought oh, that's how, like a pin. He's like a bowling ball into the bowling pin. But when written well, he can be such an impactful villain for Spider-Man or for Daredevil, for so many others. So yeah,
he may look a little silly, but Kingpin is my kind of villain. He's the type who's a criminal mastermind. He is able to do so much without relying too much on superpowers. That's the kind of villain I really like. It's like him, Joker, Zod. I mean, Zod has a lot of incredible powers too, but he usually relies on his intellect and cunning. I say Joker because he doesn't have any powers, but most of the time. But again, literally, Kingpin's just, to me, the purest example of my kind of villain. Someone who's just indomitable without any form of powers, and that's something that I really, really enjoy. So, as silly as it may sound, and not to mention, guy's only strength level 2, I think, but he's able to go toe to toe with Spidey really easily.
Yeah,
and that's honestly really impressive for me.
Yeah, he is a really strong guy, and he doesn't have superpowers. He doesn't take anything. He's just a big guy who's able to take him on, and he's also really smart. Kingpin's a really smart villain, in contrast to Kraven, who's just crazy. Kraven has his smart moments, but I've always compared Kraven to being the Bane of the Spider-Man universe, because he literally took down Spider-Man so effortlessly. And yeah, he fought his way back, but it just kind of came across that way of Kraven's Last Hunt is kind of and you might disagree, you might say it's Spider-Man No More. It's kind of like his version of Nightfall.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting perspective. I haven't read all of Nightfall, so it's I have one issue of Nightfall, but yeah, that totally makes sense. And not to mention, if Kraven's like Bane, I'll say Kingpin is like Lex Luthor
That's fair.
because I know, or like Roland Daggett, if we want to keep it to Batman themed, because I know people say Norman Osborn is basically Lex Luthor and Joker sort of fused together, and that's fair. But if we want them separate, Kingpin is like Lex Luthor and Joker is like Carnage.
Yeah,
So
yeah. If anything, Carnage is crazier than Joker, in my opinion. Like, people will say Joker is. Look, people try and give the Joker like a tragic origin. They try and be like, oh, you read Killing Joke. He's actually like a father who fell into a vat of acid. He fell into a vat of acid and he lost his mind. He's crazy. We don't know who he really is. Um, Carnage was crazy from day one.
mhm.
And then he got the symbiote and he became even more crazy. And he's literally to the point where he and the symbiote usually have the same mind. Like that's how insane this guy is.
Keep in mind, Joker is always like, if I'm going to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice. So
That's right.
it's up in the air if that's really his actual origin or not, but it usually is.
Yeah,
But again, those two I feel like are more fair comparisons of each other than Green Goblin. I feel like Green Goblin's his own thing, you know?
definitely is. I definitely feel there. You might disagree with this. Would you see like Kingpin being more comparable to Ra's al Ghul?
Kind of. I think if Spidey had that one, I would say who who would be Spidey's Ra's al Ghul?
I'm just curious
Because
because
that
I was thinking like all powerful men, and I was like, oh, they kind of connect.
kind of, yeah. I mean, like I always compare Ra's al Ghul to Shredder from Ninja Turtles, but which is why they teamed up together
Yeah,
in that special, which we should
yeah,
really do an episode on.
yeah.
But
Which is another
uh,
interesting comic.
yes, and yes, that is a fair comparison though between Kingpin and Ra's, because I don't think Peter has anyone like Ra's, which is
Not
something that
really.
I appreciate really.
Yeah, it
But I'm
shows
sure
the
someone would
difference.
let us know.
Yeah, someone probably will. Someone will be like, it was this guy from issue 600, and it was like the one time the. No, he's El Muerto. He's the El Muerto.
Uh,
Ra's al
anyway,
Ghul is the El Muerto of this. No, I'm kidding.
anyway, to wrap this episode up, since
Yeah.
we really gone so long, let's go on into our recommendations. Everything that you should read except for this, except for the main Amazing Spider-Man run right now.
Yeah.
Um, to start, I'll always say my top pick would be Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man by Tom Taylor. It was a toss-up between this and Zdarsky Spectacular, but this to me, I feel like handles a bit more of Peter's personal relationships a bit more. It introduced a new character like Rumor, who's not anywhere else. I wonder what she's up to. I'd love to see her. She had ties with Steve Rogers, apparently. That's a whole story. And again, going into a lot of his personal relationships, you see him with the Fantastic Four, with Prowler, with Mary Jane, with everybody that you should know is a part of Peter's life. And it just goes into his impact on them and his neighborhood and on the people he protects. That to me is best exemplified here. It has that. Zdarsky Spectacular has that sort of moments, but I don't know. I feel like it's a bit more personable here. But I'll leave you to go into the other one there.
Yeah, I would recommend so real quick, we're gonna be, talking about the Spider-Man run, so we recommend, and then we're gonna get into some other recommendations because we have like 3 different recommendations we want to throw out there. Some are related to
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man, some are not. But for me, like, I'm always gonna say Craven's Last Hunt because I freaking love Craven's Last Hunt. And I'll always recommend If This Be My Destiny because If This Be My Destiny is great. And some of the older Spider-Man stories are great too. Chip Zdarsky's Spider-Man run though is really good because it's called Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man. There's some really solid elements to it, some really solid moments that come out of it, like emotional stuff, down to earth things that they do a good job of developing and playing out. Tinker is the main villain of that, which is interesting because Tinker isn't. I never really saw him as being a main villain, and they did a good job with that. The 2 standout issues in that to me will always be My Dinner with J. Jonah Jameson and the finale issue with the interviews. And yeah, I just think that that's a really good comic. Another comic though that I'm just gonna throw out there, if people don't want a Spider-Man comic but want a villain comic, Superior Foes of Spider-Man. It is
Mm-hmm.
hands down probably one of my favorite Spider-Man comics that doesn't actually have Spider-Man in it. That is just well written and good and goofy and fun. So that's another one I'm going to throw out there.
Just we could also talk about Superior Spider-Man, but we'll talk about that. Honestly, deserves its own issue, its own episode. Honestly,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to quickly touch on Zdarsky's Spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely think it's so good, and none of the events in that are ever really mentioned in the main Amazing. I personally think this is tied to the Peter B. Parker from Into the Spider-Verse. I think this is him and that story. Specifically, like that universe, not the main line, 616A, which is what Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is. So I know it's a bit confusing, but to basically sum it, they have a similar feel. I think, but just to quickly say, I think Spectacular is Peter B. Parker from Into the Spider-Verse. That's just my headcanon there.
Yeah.
So anyway.
That's a good headcanon to have, honestly.
Yes.
So
anyway, proceed.
Yeah, so those are comics I would recommend from the Marvel side of things. Now, we do have some DC recommendations we would like to give as well, and then some indie comic recommendations. I'll go because you went first with the.
Yes.
So I would recommend The Flash, specifically The Flash written by Geoff Johns, because that has a very Spider-Man feel to it. Because it feels like it should be the Spider-Man comic that we never got, because it focuses on Wally West. And basically, Wally is running around. Everybody knows his identity. He's happily married to his wife. He's going around. He's fighting people. He's solving crimes. He's living up to the legacy of his uncle, Barry, who was the second Flash. And it just has some great character moments in it. It's kind of wholesome. It's kind of fun. There's some great arcs in it. There's some great moments. It has a one more day sort of moment to it, but it ends up retconning it, thankfully, in a very smart way at the very end. And Wally ends up having 2 kids who become a big part of the comics too. And then people always say Spider-Man's villains are like Batman's villains. I would counter that and say they're actually more like the Flash's villains, because you have Captain Cold, you have Reverse Flash, who is much more like the Green Goblin. You have Gorilla Grodd. You have all these great villains who feel more like Spider-Man villains. And also how the Flash treats his villains is more akin to the Spider-Man runs than Batman, in my opinion. So that would be what I would recommend.
And for my recommendation, I would say check out Tom Taylor's Nightwing. Nightwing is very much not in as much like Spider-Man as Flash is. I would honestly say he's a lot more like Daredevil in some aspects. But to me, this book is all about several themes about Spider-Man shares: protecting the innocent, improving your community, having a positive impact on your neighborhood, growing as a human being as well as a superhuman. And Nightwing was always one of my favorite heroes growing up too, along with the Fantastic Four and Batman, because it just exemplified Dick Grayson's growth by that point. Like, it's such a turning point. And as his creator Marv Wolfman has pointed out, he didn't create Dick Grayson. He created the concept of Nightwing with George Perez, rest in peace. Marv Wolfman put it like this: Nightwing is different from Batman because he doesn't have his kind of angst. He's very much all about protecting the innocent, while Batman is about punishing criminals. And I think that's a very apt comparison, because it's very much showing the difference between the two and how they grow. And Nightwing, to me, will always be a bit more of a personable hero than Batman is. Batman is someone to look up to into the sky and fear that he's going to come for you. Nightwing is someone who is a bit more down to earth. He's a bit more with the people, I feel. So that's really exemplified well in Tom Taylor's run. It also gave us a really cool new villain with Heartless. Some people will criticize it took too long to get into Heartless's backstory, and Barbara Gordon is a bit too much of a main character as well. So it's basically like Nightwing and Oracle. But honestly, those aren't really major problems for me. I really like Nightwing exploring his relationships, though honestly I prefer him and Starfire together. Wink, wink. And I find the sort of mystery and intrigue behind Heartless to be pretty interesting. So mystique and intrigue. That's it. I don't know. That just fits for me, in my opinion. So that's my DC recommendation.
Yeah, that's it actually is a really good run. I would definitely recommend that too. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about some indie comics real quick that we think everybody should read. I'll let you go first this time because I went first the last time.
Okay. One I would recommend would be Radiant Black. It's a very new one. It's brand new. The concept behind it was originally pitched as Power Rangers meets Invincible, but honestly, I think of it more like Spider-Man meets Green Lantern. You have this kid who is finding himself, and he discovers this great power and decides to use it wisely, but he actually gets hurt during one of his first fights, so his friend takes up the mantle for him, and they go back and forth. And a lot of the major themes is trying to figure out who the real superhero is and who really deserves the title going forward, and just seeing how they grow. To me, I don't know. This feels so fresh and new and interesting. It's genuinely one of the best indie comics of the recent years, and it is very recent. I think it started in 2019. I think
like that, yeah.
It's not as fleshed out, and the villains aren't as developed as Spider-Man is, but it is still very much in line with the core themes. Great power comes great responsibility. A young man finding himself, and all that. So I really recommend that one. Radiant Black. Find your local comic store. It's a really good book.
Yeah, the thing about Radiant Black that I like is I don't always like it in comics and movies where they just throw out the F-bomb or swear like, oh, we're going to do this because it's edgy and it's cool. Radiant Black, in my opinion, has one of the best uses of the F-bomb at the end of when his friend gets hurt and he has to take on the mantle, and all he just says is fuck. And it's like, that just it hit so hard when I read that. I was like, that's fantastic. That's just me, though. A comic, so I was trying to come up with something that was comparable to Spider-Man, but there's a comic I really, really like. I just wanted to throw out there because I think everybody should read it. It's very well done, in my opinion. Then I realized it is kind of like Spider-Man because it's about the indomitable human spirit and not giving up. The comic is called Due to a Powerbomb. It's by Daniel Warren Johnson, who was a fantastic writer and artist who's doing a lot of great work. He's doing the current Transformers run, which, say with me, we're going to talk about at some point. But it is basically about a young girl whose mother was a pro wrestler, and she ends up dying in the ring to a mysterious opponent. And then the young girl is forced to team up with that mysterious opponent years later when she's offered the chance to compete in a interdimensional wrestling contest by a wizard who literally just likes wrestling and is like, hey, you all should compete. And the one difference is he doesn't know that wrestling's not technically real in some aspects. But the prize is the winners will get to resurrect one of their loved ones. And the girl is intent on resurrecting her mom. And it's a crazy, weird, funny, goofy, but also really emotional comic where it goes from like people doing like clotheslines and fighting God himself to literally you bawl your eyes out. I got emotional at the end. I'll say that. It's very well written, and I highly recommend it.
So there you have it. Those are our recommendations for everything to read except the current Amazing Spider-Man, because again, we don't want to give that book the attention it so desperately craves, and because it goes against the themes of Spider-Man that we have explored in this video. So we really hope you guys check those books out, and we hope that they give you as much enjoyment as they're currently giving us. And of course, some honorable mentions will always be the Ultimate series for me. One last thing is like honorable mention. Ultimate series, Ultimate Spider-Man. It's just
Ultimate
so
Spider-Man. Yeah,
it's like,
we got to throw that out there because it's Ultimate Spider-Man. It's the best interpretation of him right now.
And the original too. Like the original, it went on for like 15 years. It's got so many books. It's so refreshing to see, honestly. So, yeah, definitely recommend those. Those are our recommendations there.
Well, that's gonna wrap it up for this episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we hope to see you next time, or to have you listen in next time. And thank you for joining the chaos that was this episode, and hopefully Joe DiMaggio is listening. But
where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Our nation needs you more than you will know. Ooh.
And with that singing, cue the music. See you guys later.
Bye.